Man, in the springtime, there's so many different baits you can throw. Soft plastic, hard baits, and they come in so many different sizes and colors, and it gets dizzy and array. Let's just talk about hard baits here for a minute. I mean, they come in so many different vibrations and actions and different types, and a lot of them will work this time of the year. Spring, especially from when it's really cold, from the ice out all the way up until summertime. There's hard baits you can use throughout that period, but there's 5 here that I think work pretty much throughout the entire spring. So let's talk about those, starting with the spinnerbait. The spinnerbait is extremely versatile. If you guys know me, you know, I fish spinnerbaits year round. They're that versatile, so spring is no exception. Springtime for me is, you know, when it's cold out, when the temperatures are in the upper 40s, low 50s, I'm starting off with a heavy spinnerbait, like a 3/4 ounce white spinnerbait with a Colorado blade, something, a big thumper, thump, 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 that I can reel really slow and put off that vibration. And that tends to work really well in those colder water temps, especially if you're fishing ledges or drop-offs or deep points. You can let it fall and just helicopters down. The body falls straight down and the blade just helicopters. And a lot of times that is actually the pattern. You can catch fish doing that. I was fishing a partner one time and I caught 3 fish in a row, 3 casts in a row doing that off a point. And he didn't have a spinnerbait tied on. He was still busy trying to tie on a spinnerbait, and I got 3 before he even got done doing that. So it can be really, really productive in that early spring. And now as it warms up, you can flip over to Indiana blades or willow leaf blades, especially tandem, and that's gonna get a lot of action, a lot of movement, and it's gonna put off a lot of vibration. And you can speed it up and you can fish shallower with that. And because of the weedless nature of the spinnerbait, you can fish it around weeds and bushes and timber without fear of getting it hung up around weeds. It works, it's very, very flexible. And as it warms up and gets even more active into May and later, again, fishing them fast, right over the surface of weeds and along these areas where bass are hanging out, can be extremely productive. So spinnerbait is like one of my best choices throughout the whole season because it's so flexible. Just a white spinnerbait, sometimes white and chartreuse if there's some stain to it, or if I'm fishing smallies. The other thing is the wire size I look for. Now a lot of guys will get the thicker wire because it lasts longer and it doesn't break, but that really dampens that vibration that that blade puts off, and that's a problem. The vibration is the key characteristic of what generates those strikes. So in my mind, I get a smaller diameter wire, and that has a lot of vibration to it and makes that blade just thump, 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 and put off a lot of action. The downside of that is eventually the spinnerbait is gonna break. That's just all the nature to it. That's what happens. I usually break 3 to 5 spinnerbaits a year. That's normal. But you think about it, a spinnerbait costs what, $5, $6, maybe a little bit more than that, but it costs about the same or maybe less than a bag of plastics. And once you burn through the plastics, you're done. You have to buy a new bag. Well, you burn through those as fast, if not faster, than you would the spinnerbaits with a thinner wire. So it's just the cost of doing business, guys. That's just the nature of it. You want to catch more fish, get a spinnerbait with thinner diameter wire. Now the next bait that works throughout the spring is the jerkbait. And the jerkbait, a lot of guys, you know, they relate jerkbaits to early spring, like late winter actually, when the temps get above 45. And into the temps get into the low 50s. They consider that like jerkbait time, and it is. Don't get me wrong, jerkbaits work really well, particularly the suspending, the deep diving suspending jerkbaits. It's hard to beat during that time of year. You fish them over long tapering points, over humps, ledges, creek channels, those secondary points leading up to the areas where the bass will eventually respond. Those are the things that I would be targeting, rock piles. Just get that bait down to that depth where those fish are at and let it sit and bake. Just motionless, and hang out. Then give it a little nudge, a little bit of movement to make it look alive, and then let it sit again. And that patience really pays off because eventually a bass is going to come up and nail it. So you better be ready for it. You'll get bored after a while, but eventually sometimes a bass will hit it when you're not expecting it. So deep diving suspending jerkbaits early in the spring, but then as spring moves on, you get shallower diving jerkbaits, and they don't have to necessarily suspend. They can float up a little bit. They give a little more action because now your cadence speeds up. And the cadence is, you know, your twitches, how many twitches you do, and how long your pauses are in between twitches. You have to experiment with that. There's no real recipe for that. But as it warms up, you have faster twitches and harder twitches and lesser pauses. And you can even get to the point where you're mid to late spring where you just twitch, 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 twitch as you're reeling it all the way back to you without any pauses at all. Another way to fish them is get the floating type, like a floating Rapala, and they only dive down about 1 or 2 feet deep, maybe 3 at the most. But you twitch, 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 and let it float back up, and then let it sit. Let it float on the surface. Don't even move. And it just sits there, and sometimes just motionless, a bass will come up and inhale it. I caught an 8-pounder once doing that. He was under a dock. I just threw it alongside the dock, twitch, 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 and let it float back up and let it sit there, and this bass just couldn't stand it anymore. Came up and inhaled it. Whew! That was fun. But that can be a real productive way to catch and fish. You know, bass, especially with the jerkbaits over weed beds after the bass have spawned. Jerkbaits, that's where a lot of times where the fry will go, and you got fry garters in and around the weeds, and you put a jerkbait through that ball of fry, and the bass will just annihilate it. So jerkbaits work really well throughout the spring. A couple things about them. One of them is you want to have them on a snap or on a split ring. That way it gives the jerkbait enough movement. It gives that freedom to move and wiggle around. Don't tie directly to the eye of the jerkbait. You're actually going to dampen its movement, and it's not going to be as effective. So that's one tip. The other one is you want a jerkbait that runs true, that comes straight to you. Sometimes out of the box they go sideways on you, and those are really hard to work. They're not as effective. I haven't really figured out a good way to get them to run straight, because the eye, the way it is, bending the eye doesn't seem to help that much. If it doesn't run straight, I just put it down and get a different jerkbait. I believe in it that much. You want a jerkbait that runs true, because then it gets that full wiggle action, and you can jerk, pause, jerk, pause. You get all of the movement that you need with a jerkbait that runs true. So make sure you've got that in your arsenal. The next bait to have in your arsenal is a Squarebill crankbait. Man, there's a reason why they're so popular, especially in the spring, is they're dynamite. They catch fish. You can fish them pretty much in anything except for vegetation. And they really are designed for hard cover, like laydowns and stumps and wood and riprap rocks. Because that lip, what it does is that it's designed to hit and deflect off those hard objects. And that deflection is what creates a strike, a reaction strike. So you want to intentionally bounce it into things. Okay, that's the idea. You're ricocheting this thing. This is why they oftentimes have a little wider body, because that wider body protects the hooks behind it. You'd be surprised at how weedless they are. Doesn't mean you won't get snagged, but you won't get as snagged as much as you think you would with a treble hook. And their action, their vibration, they put off a lot of movement, a lot of vibration, and that just triggers strikes. They're especially effective when the bass are up less than 5 feet of water during that springtime, both pre-spawn and post-spawn. Couple things about them. Make sure that you've got yourself a lure retriever. Like I said, they're weedless, but it doesn't mean they will never get snagged. And sometimes you get hooked down there and you want to get that lure back. Make sure you got some lure retrievers with you so you can get that lure back. The other thing, back to like I was with the jerkbaits, is that you want it to run true most of the time. Now the cool thing about these is that the line tie where it's at is if it starts to go off this way, you can bend the line tie back over this way with a pair of pliers and it'll run straight. That's cool. But also, say you want it to run into dock pilings. You got a dock like this and you cast and you want to run along that dock, but you want it to bounce into the dock pilings, you can bend that line tie a bit so it runs a little bit to the side and bounces off those boat docks and off those pilings. That can be a very effective way of fishing them. One of the things also, the characteristics when you're looking for getting a square bill, is you want a bill that's almost straight down from the body. One that's kind of at an angle isn't going to put off as much vibration, and that's the key characteristics of a square bill, is how much vibration it puts off. So the more that the bill's straight down from the body, the more it's going to wiggle back and forth and put forth that action, and that is the type of bait that you want to be throwing in the spring. The next bait is one of my favorites, and that is a lipless crankbait. Man, I've been throwing those for a long time, I'm telling you. I actually started throwing them when Hedden came out with, I think it was called the Sonic or the Sonar. I think it might have been called the Sonar. That was well before Rattle Trap was around. It is a dynamite bait in the spring, especially when the water temps just peak past 50 degrees. Break out those lipless crankbaits. That tight wiggle, it's I don't know, it is something that triggers the bass in the springtime. And you can fish these baits at different depths and different speeds. This is what makes them so versatile. You can fish them off of main lake points, humps, ridges, ledges, creek channels that are leading up into spawning flats early in the spring. Those are areas I would target. You can get it down to the depth that you want it to be and then reel it along at a slow or a quick pace just so it hugs the bottom, and that can be dynamite way of fishing. As the fish get up shallower and spring moves on, you can now quicken the pace. You can fish a little bit shallower. You can fish with more speed and across weed beds, along docks. One of the things that I like to do is experiment with cadence. So bringing it back really fast is good. Bringing it back even faster is gooder. I find sometimes that the bass, you just can't reel it fast enough. It's like you cannot reel it too fast and they'll just annihilate it. So fast retrieves with a lipless crankbait can be really good. On the other hand, giving it a yo-yo type or stop and go retrieve. Retrieving it back and then pausing it, let it flutter down, and then bring it back up again and bring it back up the water column, and then pause and let it flutter back down and reel it back up again. Sometimes when you kill it and it starts to flutter back down, that's when the bass hit it. Okay, that can be really good when the bass in the pre-spawn period, when they're not as aggressive. That can be a way of triggering those bites. So try that. A couple things about these lipless crankbaits is color. Color, I would get the chrome, chrome with blue, chrome with blackback. Those work exceptionally well in clear waters, or for smallies. Smallies just crush it. I don't know why, but they do. You just got to have yourself some shad color, like Tennessee shad or sexy shad. And then I like to have crawdad colors, 3 main crawdad colors in the spring. There's the red, green, and brown crawdads. The reds work particularly well when the fish are less than 3 feet of water, 4 feet of water, and then I use the other colors when they're deeper. Crawdads, they start to get more active when the water temperature gets in the low 50s and the bass start to change their diet from shad or bait fish to crawdads. So flipping over that crawdad pattern in the mid 50s can be really, really good. All the way through the spring and into the summer, actually, because crawdads are just a staple of the bass diet. So make sure you have those colors handy. One of the things about lipless crankbaits is you would think the ones that make the most amount of noise are the most productive. It's not always the case. I've actually caught a lot of bass on lipless crankbaits that don't have any rattles at all. Some of them are made out of hard plastic or, soft plastic material, or like I mentioned, the heading, that didn't have any rattles in it, if I remember correctly. Just that through the water is all they need. They don't need those BBs and sound in it. One of the key things about it is you want to have hooks, like a wide gap hook on it. If it doesn't have a wide gap hook, then put them on it, because a lot of times the bass will slap at this bait and you won't hook them unless you got a wide gap hook. So you'll catch more bass with a wide gap treble hook on it than you would with the stock round bend. It's just a little tip. So lipless crankbaits, try those out this spring. Now the last hard bait for spring that I use throughout spring is a popper. Even when it's cold out. A lot of people, I think there's a misconception that the topwater bite doesn't really happen until after the spawn. And it's true, the topwater bite really kicks on after the spawn. But early, pre-spawn, when the water temps are in the low 50s, topwater bite can still be killer. You get these bass that come up, they've been deep all winter long, and they come up shallow, and this is their first time up shallow water, and they're susceptible to these lures. They're not used to seeing them. And so a little popper, a smaller bait fish profile popper that puts out subtle action, just bloop it. Don't put a lot of action into it, just bloop, bloop, and let it, long pauses in between. That's what works in the early spring when the water temps are really cold. Around, points. I love it around points, especially points of scattered rock and boulder or laydowns in them, or patches of weeds. Rock piles, humps, ridges, creek channels, right over the top of it, just bloop, bloop, and let it pause. Now, when the water temperature warms up and the bass are up in less than 5 feet of water, then anything's fair game. Now you can throw it alongside docks, emerging weeds, around lily pads. The choices are endless, and you can speed it up. Now you get you still use on a small, slender profile bait, but one that's maybe more of a flat face that spits out more water. And you want a little more, that puts out a little more action, a little more noise, and don't make as long pauses in between. So here you just like bloop, 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 and let it sit. and then bloop bloop and let it sit. Maybe pause 5 seconds, maybe a little bit longer, and then bloop bloop bloop. You know, erratic. You want to make it look like a bait fish that's struggling, that maybe was stunned by another bass and is struggling to stay alive. Something that looks injured, that's what triggers the strike. And then, of course, when you get into the spawn, bringing one across the bed works very well. Hold on tight. Bringing it across fry garters after the spawn can be awesome. Sometimes you just, right when the popper lands, you haven't even done anything, they'll smash it. They get so aggressive. And you can just sometimes bring it back so quick without any pauses, just bloop, 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 bloop. And sometime during that retrieve, whammo, they'll crash it. I mean, it can be dynamite action for the first month or so, maybe 2 months after the spawn can be really, really fun. So it's a dynamite spring bait, even in the early spring, throughout the entire spring and into the summer. So those are the top hard baits I would have on the deck, ready to throw throughout the entire spring. Hope that helps. For more tips and tricks like this, visit bassresource.com.